This introduction to SQL Fundamentals is the first in a series of presentations. These presentations are based on examples presented with accounts in the Microsoft Enterprise Consortium. Teachers can request these accounts for free for students, but they have to be requested by an instructor. The URL is provided at the beginning and the end of this presentation. Structured Query Language, SQL, also called SQL, is the language for working with data in a relational database. The core SQL commands are consistent across commercial DBMS software, database management software. These DBMS software companies adhere to the standards set by the American National Standards Institute for SQL compliance. They're not all 100% compliant, but they strive to be compliant. There's always a chance when you write an SQL command or a series of commands in a script that it will only operate in a single DBMS and it will have to be revised in order to run in a different DBMS. The SQL used in this series will either be a generic, compatible, ANSI compatible format, or it'll be in Transact SQL, which is specifically for Microsoft SQL Server. T-SQL is also used as a shorthand for Transact SQL. We will work with Microsoft SQL or SQL Server Management Studio. This provides a nice interface for viewing existing tables, databases within your account and other accounts that you might have access to. It provides an interface for writing and executing SQL, and it has several other tools. SQL is divided into different categories or commands that serve a particular purpose. This set of SQL statements called DDL, Data Definition Language, are used to define or create objects in a database. The most frequently used one is the create table statement. DML, or Data Manipulation Language, is the subset of SQL statements used to work with existing data in existing databases. So the commands you use to pull data out of a table or tables, to update a particular field in a table, or to add a new row to a table are all part of the DML set of SQL statements. We'll first look at the data definition language, and we'll look at creating a table. This example shows creating a table for teams with 3 fields and 2 constraints. 2 of the fields are required, that's what the not null represents, and 1 field is optional, it can be left blank. We have a primary key constraint and we have a uniqueness constraint. When you create a table, you assign at least 1 column to that table. That is also referred to as a field. In this case, we have create table teams with a field called team ID, team underscore name, and project. Each field has to have a data type. In this case, variable character, or varchar, is used as the data type for the 3 fields, and the width of the field is listed after the data type. 2 of the fields are defined as not null, which means they cannot be left blank. They must be populated when you add a row to a table. We also see the primary key constraint, and that's the syntax for that is constraint followed by the constraint name. A naming convention is to use the type of constraint such as PK for primary key as the start of that constraint name, followed by primary key, which are the reserved words for the primary key constraint, and then the name of the field or fields that make up that primary key for this particular table. The uniqueness constraint is again the constraint command, the constraint name starting with UNIQ, the unique reserved word, and then the field that has that uniqueness constraint. So you can have a field in a table that has a uniqueness constraint, meaning no two teams can have the same name in this table, even though that particular field, team_name, is not the primary key. In this example of the create table statement, we are creating a table called students. It has several fields or columns, and one of these serves as a foreign key constraint because it's used to relate back to the team table. So the command here is constraint followed by the name of the constraint using FK for the beginning of that constraint name. Foreign key are the reserved words for that type of constraint, the name of the field that serves as the foreign key, and this references the table called teams. And the DBMS knows that team's primary key, team ID, is what this particular foreign key field will reference. A data model shows the sequence in which tables are created in a database. The series of lessons for database fundamentals talks about the data model and how it is designed and what information it conveys to us. In this example here, for the students and teams, what we see is that because of the one-to-many relationship, you need to create the teams table first, because students has a foreign key field that has to reference the existing field in the teams table. So based on this data model, teams must be created before you create students. Students must be created before you create evaluations, because there are two foreign key fields in evaluations that relate or reference back to the student's primary key. And eval items and evaluations need to be created before you create the final table, eval items scores. In this series of SQL presentations, we will work with an existing AdventureWorks database. This is provided by Microsoft with SQL Server, and it already exists. If you have your MEC account, you'll be able to use that database. You will also create a student teams database, and you will be provided with the scripts to do that. There's a set of commands and a file that creates the 5 tables. There's a file that has commands to insert data into the tables, and then there is a file if needed where you can drop all the tables. So in this lesson, we've talked about the standards for SQL set by ANSI. We've talked about Transact SQL specifically for SQL Server for Microsoft. We'll be using Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio software to connect to the database. We've talked about SQL and its subsets of commands, DDL and DML. And we've looked specifically at the create table DDL statement, the data definition language SQL statement that creates a table, defines columns, and defines constraints.